May I have the first slide? Is that something I control? I guess not. So this is thematic of what we will try to accomplish. There's one concept and one message under here, but there's so many ways to say it. And we do definitely want you to feel welcome. We would like to have an atmosphere of the next couple of days that people are uninhibited to speak what's on their mind, that they feel comfortable, and that's the way that we're going to together make progress in what we're doing. I also want to extend welcome not only on behalf of several NIH components which are listed in your book, but a special welcome from Dr. Pia Brito of UNICEF, who regrettably had a schedule conflict but would very much like to continue working with us, and that she called me yesterday to reassure me of her ongoing interest and collaborative potential. And in addition, Dr. Mickey Chopra, who used to be with UNICEF but is now with the World Bank. And he wrote me that if this wasn't spring break week and he was off with his family, he would definitely be here. And he too would like to work with us and collaborate. So I have follow-up meetings scheduled with both of them, and they both wanted to extend their regret at not being here in person, but their continuing interest and potential engagement. So we're talking in an abstract sense, and my colleagues will get down to the very specifics, but we're talking in an abstract sense that a person, an individual, or maybe many people, a population has an exposure, and there are a range of outcomes that can result in different states, from highly unfavorable, which is this red at the top, to favorable. And in an unstable relationship, that is one that is not symbiotic, the unfavorable outcomes have a higher probability. And we are looking collectively to have an impact on that. I just had a conversation with Dr. Marion Gruber, who noted the progress in the last 20 years in the acceptability of immunizing pregnant women, and of the greater interest in developing products that can enhance that public health goal. So when we utilize immunization, and the next speaker will elaborate more on this theme, we wish to shift that paradigm of the unstable relationship so that there's a higher probability of a favorable outcome for the person or for the population. We will be discussing several terms, and I wanted to just remind those of you who may not have familiarity with some of the nuances of these terms that when we discuss a typology, we are classifying something on common characteristics, everything that is green, everything that is square. If we are discussing a taxonomy, we're classifying based on origin, all viruses that share a common ancestor, and so forth. When we discuss ontology, if the first two concepts were thought of as trees on how you can group and classify things, an ontology is a full system, many trees, with hierarchies and relationships among those trees. Semantics is how we describe or represent what exists, and we are looking here, in the Gaia project efforts, are to develop a controlled terminology. And then syntax is the formal relationships among the elements of the system, the relationships among the concepts and the terms. Some people confuse the term syntax with what is collected on your bill in Las Vegas, but we're using it a different way. So it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is a wonderful exemplar of the outcome of the interaction of an intelligent, talented person with a productive environment. And Dr. Peter Marks has Ivy League pedigree. He's been at several Ivy League institutions, and he has been in the pharmaceutical industry. And I also find the more that we speak together that eventually I think we'll discover we're cousins. But in any case, Dr. Marks is the director of the Center for Biologics. It's formerly the Center for Biologic Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration, and he has kindly agreed to provide the opening remarks. Dr. Marks.
So thank you, Dr. Hirschfeld, for inviting me to provide these opening remarks. So vaccines are among the most effective measures available to protect and promote public health. They're very cost effective. Though one can argue about the effectiveness of a number of medical interventions, the evidence for the effectiveness of vaccination in reducing or eliminating certain diseases is really indisputable. This slide graphically shows the reduction in disease between the 1900s and 2010 as a number of infectious diseases were addressed by immunization. The number of cases of measles has been reduced by 4 orders of magnitude, at least, and smallpox has been completely eliminated. An ironic testament, though, however, to this remarkable success of vaccines has been the reemergence of certain infectious diseases in groups of individuals who are so unfamiliar with the scourge of various potentially life-threatening childhood illnesses that they decide to forego vaccination for their families because of concerns regarding the safety of vaccines themselves. Perhaps these individuals don't realize that taken as a whole, vaccines that are licensed in the United States are among the safest of medical products that we use. Nonetheless, we must always maintain our vigilant watch for potential emerging safety concerns. In addition, understanding the potential benefits and risks of the use of specific vaccines in specific populations is essential to facilitating appropriate use. This principle certainly applies to the use of vaccines during pregnancy, where relevant effects on the fetus might be immediate or delayed. Further study of immunization during pregnancy is highly desirable, given the potential benefits to both mother and child. This issue could not be more topical at the moment as we watch with great concern as Zika spreads northward through the Western Hemisphere. Though vaccines to immunize against Zika virus will no doubt first be studied in men and women of childbearing potential who are not pregnant, ultimately study may move to administration during pregnancy. During tomorrow's afternoon session, the appropriate conduct and monitoring of such Zika virus vaccine trials will be the topic of discussion. As for topics addressed by today's sessions, addressing the regulatory considerations involved in the licensure of vaccines to be used for immunization during pregnancy will be critical to facilitating investment and development by manufacturers. In addition, as we move to study immunization during pregnancy, further refining the framework for clinical investigation and the definitions for the assessment of outcome should help expedite a variety of aspects of vaccine development as well as regulatory decision-making. Carefully choosing and defining the terminology that we use and our methods will be absolutely critical, as otherwise our work together will be less effective moving forward. Without agreement on how we will define things, we could be looking at the same thing and describing it differently. And I just show this classic Gestalt image to show that we can sometimes look at the same thing and end up describing something differently, because a number of people in the audience probably right now see a chalice, and the others probably see a man and a woman looking at each other. And unless we agree upon which we're going to actually be looking at, we could be looking at the same thing and describing it differently. So with that, I will conclude by thanking you all who are here from various government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and academic institutions in the United States and overseas for taking the time over the next 2 days to have this very important discussion, and it really couldn't be more timely. So thank you once again, and I'll hope to keep us on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marks. And I see that your last slide underscored not only the season, but where we may be in our discussions, that we're just starting to blossom as we go forward. Our next speaker, muss ich sagen, dass ich habe gewusst, es gibt so viele Deutsche, dann hätte ich der Bonhoeffer gefragt, die Einleitung zu machen. But I'll try. Trained at different universities in Germany in a variety of skills and academic fields, then brought her talents to the pharmaceutical industry, where she had outstanding success leading multiple international studies and bringing products to market and advancing the field with new scientific knowledge. Then she shifted her focus and brought her talents to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she has a leadership role and has been contributing to global thinking about how we can best utilize these tools that we have, not just the products, but the process. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ajoki Sobanya-Termoilen, who will give us some remarks on the immunization portfolio overview.
Thank you, Dr. Hirschfeld, for these very kind words in German and English. Very impressive. I've been asked to give you a short, concise overview of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's portfolio on maternal immunization, and very happy to say that the Gaia activities and projects are part of this portfolio. Okay, so why are we investing in maternal immunization? So for the Gates Foundation, reduction of childhood mortality under 5 years is a major priority. And what we've seen over the past 25 years is that there's been a significant reduction in both childhood as well as maternal mortality in the range of 50%. But there's been much less progress in reducing neonatal mortality. And so this is one of the main focus areas for our disease strategies, and maternal immunization being one of them. So since last year, we're now finishing up the unfinished Millennium Development Goals with the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you can see, maternal and child health remains one of the key targets. Deaths that have not been tracked under the MDGs are the 2.6 million babies that are estimated to be stillborn every year, and notably 98% of these stillbirths occur in low-middle income countries. And maternal immunization is a strategy that could potentially also reduce these deaths. Of the deaths that occur under the age of 5 years, nearly 50% occur in the neonatal period, and of those, about a quarter are due to infectious diseases, and these are our target areas. Of course, not all of them are preventable by maternal immunization, but maternal immunization has the promise to deliver on 3 endpoints, so which is affecting the maternal morbidity and mortality, childhood infectious diseases, as well as the prevention of stillbirth and perhaps even premature birth. This is, of course, only one of many interventions that are being supported to reduce neonatal mortality. And as you can see, maternal immunization fits into what we call a susceptibility zone, which is first 2 months of life, where the infant relies on protection of maternal antibodies and is too young to receive EPI immunization. So one of the questions asked was, what's been the recent progress in maternal immunization? And this is a busy slide, but what it shows you is that maternal immunization has been practiced since the 1900s. And I ask you to look at this maybe after the presentation. But what you can see is that during the past 3 to 5 years, enormous progress has been made across many different institutions. So meaning including academic groups, industry, regulators, etc. And the most notable progress has been the advancement of RSV vaccine to phase 3 pregnancy trials as a first vaccine pursuing a path to licensure for a maternal indication. The Gates Foundation has been involved with maternal immunization since 2009. The first efforts being made to support efficacy trials for influenza maternal immunization. Right now, our two priority areas are RSV as the #1 priority, and then followed by GBS, as well as pertussis maternal immunization. Aside from supporting vaccine development and everything that's needed to bring these vaccines to pre-qualification, and I just want to point out that we're entirely focused on low-middle income countries, with our geographical focus being the current Gavi countries. We also support investments and activities and shape global thinking in cross-cutting themes that affect successful licensure as well as implementation and uptake of maternal immunization, such as safety surveillance, vaccine acceptance, evidence generation, epidemiology, as well as guidelines and standardization, working closely with WHO and other global stakeholders. So right now, over 34 countries are implementing maternal immunization effectively, and this is following the 2009 pandemics and the 2012 SAGE recommendation to prioritize pregnant women. Reason why, from a Gates Foundation perspective, the prioritization has slightly shifted for low-middle income countries is that the effect that has been demonstrated on reducing severe disease and death in infants could not be demonstrated in the 3 efficacy trials that we funded over the past 3 years. And so these were 3 trials funded in Mali, Nepal, and South Africa. Very similar study design, and some of the investigators actually are participating here at this meeting. And the trial that was conducted in South Africa was published in 2014. And what you can see here is that maternal influenza immunization led to about 50% protection from influenza-associated lower respiratory disease in infants and their mothers. But, and this perhaps was one of the challenges in these trials, the clinical definitions and endpoints of these studies were not geared towards assessing prevention of severe disease and death. And this is something that is the key endpoint that Gavi is looking at in prioritizing which vaccine programs to fund for low-middle income countries. So that's a very important aspect to keep in mind when designing vaccine trials in low-middle income countries that are geared towards either supporting recommendations or adoption of these vaccines in those geographies. The studies demonstrated that maternal immunization studies can be effectively conducted in these countries, and more than 10,000 pregnant women were enrolled. And the data generated by these studies are also now being used to both advise post-licensure supplements for labeling, as well as potentially also support licensure of new vaccines. Another very important disease is RSV, which many consider the most important respiratory disease right now, causing severe morbidity and mortality at a global level. And the current estimates are 66 to 199,000 deaths globally per year. And again, these estimates are, of course, limited by insufficient surveillance in these countries. So one of the key activities that we're engaged in is extensive surveillance studies for RSV globally. So the Gates Foundation is supporting the RSV vaccine that has now entered phase 3 vaccine development, and I know that Alice and August will have a presentation later in this meeting, and you will hear more details about that. So this is really a milestone in maternal immunization, as this is the first vaccine that is pursuing a maternal indication. And the role of the Gates Foundation there is to enable parallel licensure, both in high-income as well as low-middle-income countries, because this historically, vaccine programs have, especially when led by larger pharmaceutical companies, but also by biotechs, just driven by commercial needs, have primarily focused on licensure in high-income countries, and then a low-middle-income development strategy followed much later on, meaning that these products are not accessible to these populations at the same time, or might not even be accessible at all. Another disease area we're focusing on is pertussis. So as you know, pertussis circulates globally in all populations, and the highest case fatality rate is in young infants. And most of the data we know come from high-income countries, such as the one you're seeing here on the right, which is hospitalizations and death in the United States. And you see that most of them, up to 90%, actually occur in infants up to 2 months of age. So the estimation of pertussis disease burden globally is a key challenge, and this is because there's no active surveillance in most geographies, and the estimates in terms of underreporting, potential underreporting, which range up to 1,000-fold underreporting. We did conduct 3 surveillance studies over the past year in South Africa, Zambia, and Pakistan. And what those studies showed is, again, confirmed circulating pertussis, but we're not able to identify a significantly high burden of pertussis-associated mortality. So for that reason, we will now be focusing on mortality-based surveillance to get a better grip on these estimates. The WHO estimates are also focused on or based on modeling and not on direct disease burden estimates in these countries. So I think this is very important to understand, because these estimates are also used for the global disease burden estimates and are used for programmatic decisions. We know that pertussis maternal immunization works, which is very important. So it's not easy to find effective and safe interventions at hand that could actually be readily implemented. So the UK have demonstrated that vaccinating pregnant women has about 91% vaccine efficacy, have reached very, very high vaccination coverage. And the safety data, of course, are also very important, with over 70,000 pregnant women having been immunized to date. One key safety issue for maternal immunization with pertussis is potential interference with childhood immunization. And this is both for diphtheria and tetanus, but also for diphtheria or more CRIM-conjugated vaccines, as can be seen in this historical comparison, where you see that the titers elicited with CRIM-conjugated meningococcal vaccines are lower than those after tetanus-conjugated vaccines. Very important aspect to consider in future vaccine development. This is one of the reasons why we are focusing on pertussis toxoid-only vaccine development. Main reason being generating a safe and efficacious but also cost-effective vaccine for developing countries. And pertussis toxoid is available in its genetically inactivated format and will be manufactured at a much lower cost. And pertussis toxoid has been demonstrated in clinical studies to be the primary correlate for severe disease and death in infants. So if we are able to demonstrate a correlate of efficacy against pertussis, this correlate could then also be used as a basis for future vaccine development. And one of the things to look out for in the long term are combination vaccines, and such as combining PT with, be it RSV or GBS, which would also address the delivery aspects of maternal immunization in low-middle income countries to reduce the number of doses to be given during pregnancy. But this is a long-term goal and can only be achieved by, I guess, a few players out there. GBS, second priority, also being prioritized by WHO. So this is consistent with WHO prioritization, where RSV is at first place and GBS is second place, with being one of the most important disease pathogens to cause neonatal sepsis and meningitis. In the US and other high-income countries, we have intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis, which protects 80% reduction of early onset disease, within the first week of life, but nearly no effect on late onset disease within the first 3 months of life. So such a vaccine would also have great value for these countries, even in the presence of intrapartum prophylaxis. It still remains one of the most important pathogens to cause meningitis. This is from the US. The disease burden data are incomplete as for many other pathogens, and the highest incidence has been reported in sub-Saharan Africa, notably in southern Africa, and we need to engage more and further in trying to get at the predictors of severe disease and mortality caused by GBS in other geographies. So right now there's no biological hypothesis why these rates should be different in Southeast Asia versus sub-Saharan Africa. Another safety and also efficacy issue to address is special populations such as HIV-positive mothers, with up to 30% of pregnant women being HIV positive in South Africa. And of course, this has to be looked at in GBS vaccine development. Here again, we are very confident that the vaccine would work because since the 1970s, it has been demonstrated in several studies that IgG titers in the mother correlate with disease, risk for disease in the infant. The issue of stillbirth, which I think is one key aspect addressed by Gaia as well, definition of stillbirth, is something of great importance for GBS vaccine development because it has the potential to reduce infection-related stillbirth, as infection occurs both intrauterine as well as peripartum. And this, again, is something that needs to be looked at in more detail, as right now the causal association has not yet been demonstrated. There are also multiple vaccines in development, and I think the most recent outlook here is that a pentavalent vaccine will most likely be what most companies will prioritize, and which would confer 90% serotype coverage worldwide for invasive disease in infants. For GBS vaccine licensure, importantly, vaccine phase 3 efficacy trials are challenged by the numbers of women that need to be enrolled in such studies. So it's in the range of 60 to 70,000. And we're looking at a concerted effort of trying to achieve licensure based on immune correlates, which requires standardization of assays, but of course also a lot of data, especially from low middle income countries, and bridging those to high income countries. So lastly, to talk about the cross-cutting challenges that we're addressing, I just picked out two. We, of course, have multiple investments in different areas. I think the one overarching challenge that I guess the Gates Foundation is actually dealing with, but also specifically our maternal immunization program, is global disease burden surveillance. And a lot of programming has been based on modeling to date, and at some point, Bill Gates came to the conclusion that he really wants to have programming based on directly obtained data and less so on modeling. And this is what ultimately led to a very large investment in global disease surveillance, which is led by Emory University, and to understand what's truly killing children under 5 years of age. And this study is called CHAMPS, so this is Child Health and Mortality Prevention Surveillance Network, and it's based on autopsies instead of reported mortality rates, so meaning that dead infants are ascertained versus ascertaining hospitalized kids or doing community-based surveillance. And the reason why we think this will work is that the technology uses minimally invasive autopsies. Of course, cultural resistance, etc., is being expected, but up to now, at least in the initial piloting, it has been very positively received, as obviously parents and mothers want to know why their kids died and how those diseases can be prevented. And this way, we're also leveraging this network specifically for maternization to get at the GBS, for example, stillbirth burden, as well as the pertussis mortality burden. And lastly, Gaia. So about 2 years ago, I first met Jan Bonhoeffer at the Brighton Collaboration Workshop at WHO, and realized that Brighton Collaboration has been working at this jointly with hundreds of partners over many years. And we felt that this was really an extremely important effort that with a big gap and need across different stakeholders. And I can even speak for myself. When I worked at Novartis in GBS maternal immunization vaccine development, and we were trying to file the IND, this was one of the key issues we were struggling with, and we were combing the literature, and it was only the NIH working group publications at the time that could be used for reference. And I think now companies are obviously in a much different situation, and it's great to see all these different stakeholders now coming together to make this work. Okay, and our general approach, as hopefully you might have glimpsed from these couple of slides, is that we look at an end-to-end engagement on the path to impact for vaccines, actually for any product we're supporting. So which includes, it starts all the way from discovery. We have a large discovery group through product development and impact modeling, because we ultimately want to get these interventions to the people who are in need of them, which requires addressing implementation and financing issues from the start. Thank you very much. And yeah, not sure how I'm doing with time. Okay, if there are any questions, to take them. Okay. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sabonyo-Termoilen. And we are in that enviable position, due to the commitment of our speakers thus far, that we are ahead of schedule and under budget, which will allow us to actually begin the first session a little earlier. So there's a Gilbert and Sullivan song about the very model of a modern major general. And what is not known is that there was a rewrite of that song called The Very Model of a Modern Global Investigator. And our next speaker, I think, fits that description because he is multinational, multilingual. It's Bonhoeffer, right? I'm not sure why the slides. Anyway, I won't interrupt this introduction, which I've been working on for weeks. He's multinational, multilingual, multidisciplinary, and interoperable. And Dr. Bonhoeffer has been trained also at exceptional universities, and he has played many roles, but he's here in his role as the president of the Brighton Collaboration. And just so that we are all oriented, because precision is one of our goals, the Brighton Collaboration is not facing the English Channel, that's another Brighton, but facing the banks of the Rhine. And so direct from the banks of the Rhine comes Jan Bonhoeffer, who is going to summarize the meeting objectives and overview for us. Dr. Bonhoeffer.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks a lot for the very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure being here, and I have to say I'm really excited about the next 2 days. It's been an incredible experience to prepare this conference and to see this great interest and dedication of so many outstanding people and colleagues. So, dear colleagues and dear friends, welcome to this meeting. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, and I think we're really honored that you all took the efforts to come from very far to come together, and I'm sure we will have an inspiring meeting. Now, this meeting would not have been possible without the incredible support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, both in terms of the Gaia project kind of inspiring this meeting in trying to get the colleagues together and share experience and see how we can move forward in a concerted and harmonized way. And it would also not have been possible without the support specifically for travel bursaries for this meeting to make that possible. So we're really grateful for this opportunity. Ajoka has made it very easy for me because she provided a perfect overview of this very dynamic and very rapid field of development and where this is right now. And I will try now over the next couple of minutes to kind of bring our focus to the issues of harmonizing the safety assessment as one piece of the puzzle in this exercise. So first of all, I would like to thank the scientific committee preparing the agenda and putting the program together. This has been, and specifically I think I'd like to thank Sonali here, who's been in the eye of the storm of composing this agenda and getting all the speakers and the faculty aligned. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank the organizing committee in putting this together and making it all click. There's a saying in Switzerland that logistics is like a shoe. So if it fits, it doesn't hurt. So I hope that you have a lot of that experience, that the shoe doesn't hurt, and I think so far everything's run very smoothly. So thanks a lot for preparing and for organizing all of this. It's a fantastic support. This team has been working really hard. And this has been, I think, outstandingly led, this team, by Abi Charlet. So thanks a lot for guiding everybody through this, Abi. We would also like to recognize two very special people with us. This is Olivia Spaha and Christina McCormick. Maybe you can raise your hands. We're really happy that you're with us because you have agreed to actually take notes and to help us prepare the meeting report that we're trying to have at the end of this conference. So thanks a lot for doing this. This is a critical part of organizing this conference. Thank you very much. It is also a great pleasure and honor to thank the sponsors for this meeting, and we have had very generous support of Sanofi Pasteur, Novavax, and GSK, also helping us to make this conference possible. So we're really grateful for this support. The aims of this meeting are two. One is to highlight progress in harmonizing safety monitoring of immunization in pregnancy. And the second is to develop consensus recommendations, or at least to develop elements, to come up, to collect during the next 2 days elements towards a path forward. The objectives specifically are to discuss new safety data, and you'll see several presentations on really sharing new experiences and new results that we deem useful for the community to see. We want to identify converging stakeholder needs, and we're usually very apt about discussing differences and problems and obstacles that cannot be overcome. And I would really like to urge us during this conference to focus on where the convergence points are, what the ground is that we can actually stand on, and I think this ground is expanding every week, and we'd really like to see how can we build on this ground and how can we be creative towards a common way forward. We also want to review new standards and tools, and the Gaia project has been part of it. I hope you have all received the e-book, the e-conference book. We have not printed it. It's, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10 kilos if you print it. So you have received a version, most of you have received a version that contains, in terms of the case definitions, only, if you like, the very case definition. But every one of you familiar with Brighton collaboration documents, case definition documents, these are fairly extensive documents that are sort of built around the individual case definitions, and we have not included them. They will be part of a special issue in the journal Vaccine in the next sort of probably 1 or 2 months to be published. So they will come up in a bit. But for your reference, the section 2, the very case definitions are in that document. So we hope you'll find that useful as we go through the conference. We then also want to build consensus towards sort of best practice guidance. And the point here is that we're trying to be not so much philosophical, but we're trying to have the discussion on a practical basis. We would like to achieve, as an outcome of this meeting, that we can agree on very concrete, actionable steps that can be taken. What we want to achieve is a shared understanding of challenges and of the solutions for monitoring immunization in pregnancy and for a collaborative way forward. I think everybody who's been involved in developing case definitions has seen how challenging it can be to achieve a shared understanding on one single event where one might think that we're talking about the same thing, but we actually don't. So Peter Marx's image, I think, couldn't be more appropriate in terms of we're looking at the same thing and we believe we talk about the same thing, but we actually may not. And to hash this out is sometimes a bit of a painful process, but we believe that it's worth going through. We also want to build consensus during this meeting. The aim and the title of this conference is a consensus meeting. So we hope that we can move in this direction and crystallize during the next 2 days a few items where we feel that this group can agree on and that we can specify as action items for the next months to come, at least, until we meet for our next time, hopefully. So both of this, we would like to build consensus both on a globally concerted approach, and we would like to see whether we can come with recommendations towards optimal safety data, as this is really where we want to get at the end. It's really about improving the quality of the data that we're working on and to give added value to what each of us is doing in the different domains. And sometimes it looks like, or at least we have to find a balance between not going too much into detail, but at the same time improving the quality of the data to a degree that the individual study actually has added value by being comparable and by having a common base that will allow us to conduct analyses that we would not be able to do if we did not have a consensus. So we hope that building a consensus does not only foster comparability of data, but actually allows us to do things that we couldn't do if we were doing them alone. So no man is an island, they say. At the end, we hope that the consensus we can build will actually go into a conference report that we can publish in the Journal of Biologics, as it is common for IABS conferences to do, and IABS has agreed to facilitate that trajectory for us. So this is something we can expect to happen. So without further ado, I would just like to give you a brief overview of the scientific agenda. I think you have it all printed out. But what we really want to do in the first session is to take a bit of a bird's perspective and look at what are the general and overarching challenges that we're facing. Then to go into challenges of providing guidance, so looking more at the regulatory aspects of things. We would then like to go into addressing specifically the outputs of the Gaia project in terms of case definitions developed and to share with you the progress made there. And then go on and the next day, tomorrow, and look at observational studies. So we're kind of switching a little bit to the post-licensure side of things, and with a specific focus on low and medium income countries. Several experiences will be shared, and in the session thereafter, we'll look at what might be necessary in terms of infrastructure to support data sharing across efforts in the post-licensure domain specifically. But also some of these tools may actually find applicability for clinical trials. And maybe we can find a way that standards will help us to bridge that gap between clinical trials and post-licensure surveillance. This would be a wonderful step forward. We would then look at sort of stakeholder implementation views. So what are the different views of the different stakeholder groups on options to implement tools that we would like to use as part of a harmonized toolbox to move forward together. And we'll then conclude, so Stephen Hirschfeld at the end will be helping us to conclude and summarize and see if we have met the aim of coming up with consensus recommendations. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to 2 very interactive days. Maybe just 2 comments on this, is that everybody has a microphone, and please use the microphone, and maybe before you make an intervention, please just briefly mention your name. It will help us get accustomed to our voices as we go through the conference. Thank you so much.
Right. We've now reached the conclusion of the introductory session.